I'm standing at the Doud family plot purchased in the early 1900s. I am standing at this plot today on January 7th at Fairmount Cemetery in Denver, Colorado. 2019, where 98 years ago at this plot had Dwight D. Eisenhower and his wife Mamie standing right here in 1921. So exactly at this time, 98 years ago, Dwight Eisenhower and the family, and likely his parents, his brother, the Doud family, was standing right here where they would be burying, with the first name of Doud, D-O-U-D, Doud Eisenhower, who died at Camp Meade January 2nd, 1921. Now, why this is so important, the year is important, and why this timing is so important is because that the history that emits from this very plot could have gone in two different directions. Could have gone in a direction where someone was lost in their sorrow. Dwight Eisenhower could have gone into the private sector. It was a time that World War I was ending. It was a time where Eisenhower was likely to be released from service in the military to go into the private sector and to become really just part of history and unknown. But instead, that this history has significance 98 years later, because right here at this very plot, him burying his 3-year-old son who had died at Camp Meade, they made the train trip here, which was a lengthy train trip that would have taken at least 2 to 3 days. Could have been a day much like today. This is 98 years later. The burial of his son, which was a truly sorrowful and difficult time in his life, that this very plot would make history. Also, January 2nd, 1921, is the Chancellor of Germany, former Chancellor of Germany, Hallweg, died January 2nd as well. And what's so important about him is that with World War I, a lot of his ideas, and he was an independent, but he would go on both sides of the political spectrum, both liberal and the conservative side, and not really make a lot of any good political decisions either way. It was frustrating. It was a frustrating time, and there was a frustration growing in Germany. Later that year, Hitler, 1921, would actually take over the Nazi Party with full dictatorial powers, and we all know where Hitler led. Little did Dwight Eisenhower know, standing here at this difficult time, what his future was. He was going to go back on the long train trip to Camp Meade, likely to leave the military. I think that the commander that he the colonel had some foresight and knew that they needed to really give Eisenhower something that he yearned for, is to go to Central America, and they sent him to Panama, and just to give him a time to get out of this sorrow that he was going to obviously be in. And I think that was a turning point, because he met by chance a General Fox Connor, who saw a lot of potential in Dwight Eisenhower and gave him book readings to read, and gave him a new direction and a new plot to plot his course in life, which, of course, as we know now, 98 years, this history is actually being forgotten. But at this very point and very time, that the chess pieces were in place, where World War I had ended. Hitler was really beginning his power in 1921, and little did we know that Eisenhower was beginning his ascension. And he would ascend to take over the Allied forces in World War II as a general, a 4-star general, or 5-star Supreme Commander. He would be over the Nuremberg trials that would hang in 1946 these Nazi architects. And really, Hitler had already committed suicide. It was the end of Nazism. And it was a beginning of General Eisenhower would even go on from there and become president of the United States. And you'll see that Doud is not buried in this plot. Doud's aunt right here, who died at 18 years old, is buried here. Etta May, 1918. 1918, of course, is the history of the people died way too early in these times, and it's before antibiotics, and then really this is why Doud died as well from scarlet fever. Died as an 18-year-old, Etta May, and this is the family plot of the Doud family. Eleanor Doud died very young too, way too young, about 17 years old. And then young Doud Eisenhower died at 3, which is tremendous sadness, but Eisenhower was able to pick up the pieces. Where he was interred, finally, is that Eisenhower, President of the United States, 1966, had his casket exhumed here and sent to the museum, the Presidential Library in Abilene, Kansas, where he rests today. And this history, this most important history, is really at this very plot.